Whether on the go or at the table, get lost in a conversation about everything coffee with your host, Eric Ortiz.
Hey everyone, welcome to Everything Coffee, a podcast that delves into the relationship of coffee with a variety of people, from manufacturers, cafe owners, coffee roasters, social media personalities, and so much more. This podcast takes on a deep conversation about everything coffee. Today, I welcome in Christian and Jose, hosts of Coffee Break, a podcast that's aimed at sharing their love for coffee. And after 23 recorded episodes, much more by the time you listen to this, Christian and Jose are here to join me and talk about their podcast and passion for the coffee world. Christian and Jose are friends of over 10 years, having gone to college together, both mechanical engineers from Houston, Texas, good old Texas. Both gentlemen even work together, and their kids are starting to build friendships with each other, which is pretty darn cool. You can catch all their latest episodes at Coffee Break at coffeebreakpod.com and find them on Instagram at coffee.break.podcast. Everyone, welcome Christian and Jose. How are you guys?
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. How are you both?
Doing well. Sorry.
You guys got a little bit of time delay there. I'm always happy to have new guests, especially people that I've met in the coffee world. And long and behold, I'm not the only person doing coffee podcasts. In fact, I'm not the first ones. You guys are one of the first ones out there. Already 23 episodes. By the time this is recorded, there's 23 episodes already broadcasted. But tell me a little bit about you all, guys. Christian, you first. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Well, you kind of explained a good chunk of what we talk about in our podcast about where we started with our podcasting journey, as well as our friendship. As far as what I do, aside from the engineering that we've mentioned, I also do a little bit of, say, entrepreneurship on the side. So I recently completed my MBA, and so that kind of led me into a few different things.
Nice.
And
Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. That might be one of the things that also led us to doing this podcast, because Jose and I had talked for several years about doing something, whether it was starting a food truck or doing this thing with the podcast. And then the pandemic kind of accelerated that. So we got to try a bunch of different things, and then we eventually had the time as well as the motivation to actually do it. So and here we are today.
Yeah, that's two different things, man. Podcast, food truck. That's maybe what you should do is get the food truck and do the podcast in there.
Yeah. That'd be really interesting.
How about yourself, Jose?
Yeah, same here. So, I mean, like I had told you, Christian and I have been friends for a very long time, and we always got together and just talked about coffee, and we shared with each other, and that allowed our love for coffee to really grow through our conversations, which was really special, right? Especially because we've been friends for so long. The podcast, like Christian mentioned, it was just one of the many things that we had discussed, and the pandemic did accelerate it. And I also took it as an opportunity to practice my public speaking, because I'm not native English speaker. So it's given me a chance, and you'll probably hear in some of the episodes, there's a lot of ums and ahs coming from me because, I'm letting my brain catch up. So it's been really good practice to do a bunch of other things. But aside from the podcast, I'm not as busy as Christian is. I don't really have entrepreneurship going on and all that kind of stuff. It's just really my job, my family, and the podcast.
That's not a bad thing. Yeah, that's not a bad thing. So I've listened to a few episodes, and I'm always impressed by people who do the same things out there that I'm trying to do. It comes so easy for you all. Having that friendship, it sounds like you have a good chemistry.
Yeah, appreciate it. A couple of people have given us that feedback, and I'm glad it comes through. We like to joke around a lot, and we truly are really good friends outside of the podcast and outside of work. So I'm glad it does come through in the recordings.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know what you think, Christian.
I've heard our recordings, and I'd say it pretty well characterizes how we typically chat and talk, like day to day.
It sounds smooth, right? It sounds smooth.
Yeah. So I bother Jose in his office quite often, and I'd say what you hear on the podcast wouldn't be too different to listening to us chat in person. So glad to hear that it comes through.
Absolutely. And so I was reading, and I always tell people this, that I always ask guests to give me a little bio behind them. And I already know a little bit about the individual. I try to do a little bit of research beforehand. And one of the things that I kind of got here was that it took until like episode 2, where some folks can be a little like, I guess, frou-frou with coffee. And so that you're kind of taking the podcast into that realm where it's a little easier to kind of gauge and talk with, I guess, just people and not make it sound frou-frou, right?
Right. You know, we've been to many coffee shops in the past, and I don't want to say all of them, but the issue that I was seeing was that there was somewhat of a standoffish attitude, if that's a good term to use, toward the people that didn't really know that much about coffee. So I would go and order something and they would kind of look down on you for ordering, you know, a milk-based drink or whatever.
Sure.
And it was a little off-putting, especially for someone who's trying to come into the coffee industry and as a customer, right? It's not very welcoming. So we're trying to bring that love for coffee and that education, not that we are experts of any sorts, but just bringing it to the masses as best as we can and being approachable and friendly.
And I think it comes off as that when I listen to the podcast, it is a smooth conversation. It is I don't want to say that it's a simple conversation. It's very complex, but there's a way to approach coffee. And I've talked to many guests already, and one of the things for them is it's really important is to kind of bring it to the masses, to get the normal, person out there that just goes to the store and just wants to have some coffee to understand that there is better quality coffee out there. It doesn't have to be, rare coffees or special ways to make them, but sometimes just grinding your fresh coffee is the best step you can take before you kind of getting into this hobby. Have you all been in the hobby for some time now for coffee, or is this something where you kind of learned a little bit during the pandemic?
I'll let you go first, Christian.
I would say Jose and I probably started getting into coffee more deeply maybe about 8 years ago. So he and I have been at the same company for the last 10 years. And, you know, the first couple of years, we were still trying to get our feet under us and trying to understand the oil and gas industry that we had just joined then. And then as we got more familiar with it, we had noticed that we had more free time. So I was buying more coffee gadgets like this portable espresso machine, which, you know, in hindsight was quite terrible for actually making good espresso, but it was interesting.
Was it the Wakao Presso one by any chance?
No, unfortunately, I don't remember the brand, but it was like a little capsule that was handheld, and you like,
gotcha.
Yeah. So that was probably the start of it, and it probably wasn't until the last, what do you say, Jose, like 5-6 years or so that we really started getting into, say, espresso and researching or discovering new types of beans, etc.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, you know, in the first 5 years of the last 10 years, I think the journey kind of started with just buying better beans, and in reality with just buying whole bean at Starbucks and having a grinder at home. Like you said, Eric, you know, just that's kind of like the baby step that you take toward making better coffee, right?
Sure,
just buying, grinding fresh, making it fresh, and all that kind of stuff. And I thought I knew everything there was to know about coffee at that point. And then I find out about the AeroPress about 5 years ago. That's when Christian had, like he said,
little did you know, right?
Kind of delving deeper, right?
Little did you know that
it just accelerated.
Yeah, and it accelerates fast. I will say the same from my side. I have spent way more than I should have ever spent on gadgets and gizmos. I would say that I'm probably well over the $5,000-$7,000 range, sadly, in terms of coffee usage. But it's fun. It's addictive. Coffee, especially once you start getting into it, and as you said, the research and the types of beans, and as well as the methods of brewing, it really just comes out as a science. How much of that background in mechanical engineering comes into coffee for you all?
Jose, you should start with this one.
Okay, cool. I thought it would have much more of an impact than it actually does. I thought we'd be able to simplify it and break it down into like easy mechanical terms or easy, physics. but it's not as easy as it seems. I guess where the engineering background comes in handy is just that desire to delve deep into a question or into an issue and really learn more about that. So not necessarily the specific background, but just that propensity to do that.
I can imagine that being mechanical engineers, you guys like to tinker a lot. Is there a lot of tinkering going on when it comes down to your own machinery?
Personally, I actually don't like tinkering with things a lot. It's really strange. I love when things are great out of the box, and that is a huge plus for me. And it's really weird. There's all these modifications that you can make to your espresso machines, and I don't know if it's maybe me not trusting my own hands and thinking that I'm going to ruin my espresso machine, or me just wanting to appreciate the beauty of the machine as it came. But I don't know. Maybe at some point I'll get into that a little bit more. How about you, Christian?
I feel the same way, by the way. I have a Breville dual boiler, and this machine, I know you can modify it, and I know you can do the flow control with the water dispensing, but I'm like you. I just hate the idea of having to open up something, modifying it, do something to it, and I definitely don't trust my hands. That's for sure.
Yeah. And that's how I was with my car too. When I got my car, I didn't want to do any modifications. I wanted to just leave it stock and do it's
definitely like that. Yeah. Christian, what would you say for yourself? I mean, are you a tinkerer?
Yeah, so I am a tinkerer, but I also have a dual boiler, and the cost of it is so high. I'm not really willing to reach into it and start playing with it. And I agree with Jose that there's some products, and typically the Breville products are pretty well suited already for what they need to do, especially for the level of customer that it's looking to reach. But back to your question about how the mechanical engineering background maybe has an impact on how we deal with coffee, I would say it makes us maybe not more curious than, say, the normal non-engineering person. But I think that it does have an element in why we continue to test out, different grind sizes or different tools, as well as the types of beans. As Jose touched on already, it's the curiosity is definitely there for us because of that background.
I can imagine. I would believe that it's a little tempting to want to do it, but I'm the same way. I just won't do it. Christian, for yourself, I started doing this podcast, and I know you all have been doing this for a while now. How do you approach the podcast itself? Everyone has a different format, how you kind of, not getting into technical aspects of it, what do you use for gear, but how do you approach going in for a podcast, and how do you guys plan this together?
Lately, I would say we've done quite a bit more planning for each episode than we have in, say, the first 5 or 6 episodes. So now we talk about, a content strategy based on what time of the year or the season that's occurring, and potentially what kind of trends in coffee we're seeing. So that is a new element. But I would say generally we're looking to kind of just have fun with the episode. So there's times where we talk about, the original plan is we're going to do this, but I'm not really feeling that today. Let's see if we can just kind of take it easy and do something more fun. So generally it's how do we make something that is educational and interesting, but also fun for us to make.
Sure. And Jose, when you are approaching those guests, what goes into just getting the right guest for the show?
There's a lot of conversation that happens beforehand, and the same way you kind of reached out to us and we got to talk beforehand and get to know each other. It's a little bit about the message that people have, right? The most recent one being with Juan Welches from Honduras. He had like a very dynamic and fun thing going on with his Instagram, and he had a lot of good things to say, and he even had the chops to correct us in some technical terms that we got wrong, and I really appreciated that because that's what we're about. We want to educate people, but he did it in a way that was really educational and really friendly, rather than just shooting us down and telling us we were wrong. So I thought that was kind of the perfect personality for having in our episodes.
Absolutely. I think it's important to have guests that are willing to kind of come in there and do it, as you said, correct and properly educate, because us as hosts, myself, Jose, and Christian, we're definitely not experts in the field. I mean, we love coffee. We understand coffee. We have the gear and we act like home baristas because we kind of are. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we try to bring in experts that know far more than definitely I know about coffee itself. What have been the challenges for both of you that you just were not expecting and come in terms of podcasting, especially for the coffee world?
You should start us off, Jose.
Man, social media. Social media is a world that I did not imagine myself getting this deep into. The reality of it is you can't really promote your podcast if it's just sitting there, right? You have to have a way to get the podcast to people. So when we first started, you'll notice we didn't really have a lot of posts. We were posting maybe once or twice a week. And then every time we released an episode, and it was kind of random. But the growth was really slow, and it was showing also in the listenership. So, we kind of made an intentional decision to start creating content a little more often and spend more time trying to like post and get our name out there and trying to bring people to the Instagram so that they could eventually come to the podcast, right? And we have seen a significant increase in listenership as well as a result of that Instagram drive.
How about you, Christian? So, what has been the most challenging aspect of podcasting that you weren't expecting when it comes into coffee world, social media included?
Sure. It's really interesting that I initially had these thoughts that the difficult part of podcasting would be getting our message or our personalities to show through. And luckily that hasn't been the problem for us. I'd say the analytics around podcasting. So as Jose kind of mentioned, we're trying to figure out how do we get the listenership to increase. And it's hard to do that when the various software that we're using have analytics that don't really show us much. We don't know, if people are listening to a whole episode or just first 10 seconds of an episode. We don't know necessarily which part of the day, if we're releasing a podcast is best. So that is one element of it. And something that we talked about recently is our funnel, right? What direction is our funnel taking us? Are we trying to take people to the podcast, or are we trying to take people to the Instagram, which both of those, they have their merits. And we haven't really decided yet. I would say Jose is probably smiling to himself at the moment because we just had that discussion. But we're trying to figure it out. And I would say we're doing a lot better these days.
I understand that wholly. I see analytics and for those people that are listening in and never thought about podcasts or what goes into it, if you're doing this and you're doing this like we are in terms of having a hosting company and broadcasting things of the nature, there's several companies out there that provide the service, and there's tiers of service, obviously, and the higher the tier, the more service you get out of it, including like incredible analytics that'll tell you everything that Christian said right now that they don't get, but some people do. And the problem with that is that sometimes these podcast companies, they go from $7.99 a month to all of a sudden $25.99 a month for that next tier. And you're kind of like, should I not? That's kind of a cost that you're like, I'm not making any money off of this necessarily. It's just one of those things that goes into it, and trying to get the audience out there is a bit challenging, especially for what I've experienced with social media. It is kind of a grind every single time you're kind of trying to post. And Instagram itself, how do you guys feel about Instagram's current algorithm, and has that hurt you?
No, I actually feel like it has helped us. I feel like the algorithm has a tendency to favor Reels as of late, because I imagine they're trying to compete with TikTok and the likes.
Sure.
So I've noticed an increase in engagement from releasing Reels and such. And you'll see a lot of the personalities in Instagram are releasing a lot more Reels nowadays. The problem for me is keeping up, right? Because I have a day job and I have to be present when I'm at work. So I'm recording stuff at night after the kids go to sleep or on the weekends, and I'm trying to create content for the entire week, essentially at nights and over the weekend. So while it is helping us get the listenership, it's pretty stressful trying to generate enough content, right? And am I creating quality enough content and all that kind of stuff? That's where it gets a little bit difficult.
Jose, how much of your time is spent on this? How much time have you not been able to sleep? Because sometimes this is a little bit more challenging than we expected it to be.
Yeah. Oh, man. As far as social media specifically goes, I would want to say that I at least spend a good 3 hours. And mind you, we are not a very busy account. You know, we have one post a day or one every other day at most. And that's still taking a lot of my time, right? It's not just taking the video and posting it. I have to take it, chop it, edit it, find the right audio and all that kind of stuff and post it. Same thing with the picture. Pictures are a little bit easier because, you know, you go to a nice coffee shop, you take a picture of what you drank and post it. Makes it a little bit easier.
Sure.
But now...
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry,
yeah,
sorry,
no,
I
go
apologize.
Ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, like Christian mentioned, we've been talking about the strategy, and now what we're trying to get into is more informational posts. But that's hard, right? Because now you have to make infographics, and you have to figure out what platform you use for all that kind of stuff. What information do people want, and how to put it all together in a concise but approachable way.
Sure. And Christian, now that you all have 23 episodes, by the time this episode airs, I'm sure you'll have another episode up there. But right now you have 23. But when you first started, your guests kind of change, right? Just like when I do this podcast, you try to get a little bit of everything. How has that evolved for you in terms of what you're trying to aim for in guest selection?
So a really great question, Eric. We actually talked about this pretty recently as well. So maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago, if you had heard this one, I had interviewed a friend of mine who lives in Italy, and he talked about the coffee experience in that part of the world. And we're thinking that that's not really something that most people here in the States get, is at least a flavor of how coffee is consumed and the cultures around it. So we think moving forward that we'll probably do a few more of those where we talk to folks in another part of the world, hear about what their daily coffee ritual is, how coffee is kind of part of the culture. And then I think a lot of folks really like the Italian coffee episode, and I hope that they like the future episodes as well.
Absolutely. And Jose, when it comes down to culture and understanding of coffee, how much of that is culture for you in terms of coffee and tradition that comes out for those guests as well when you're questioning them?
Not quite sure I understand the question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. In terms of me, like I grew up in a family where Folgers was a big thing. My grandma.
Oh yeah.
Grandma was a Folgers drinker. I come from a Hispanic background, and coffee was kind of like the big important kind of first step of the morning, especially having grown up with my grandma here. And every morning she made her Folgers, and then during the weekends we'd go downtown, and there was a little cafe called La Cres downtown, little cafes up there. It was kind of like a store, a department store that had a cafe in there. And I had these memories of her just ordering her coffee and enjoying it. And that kind of, when I'm making coffee, it always kind of takes me back. And so for you, in terms of your own history, your own past, how much of that is an influence when you're interviewing your guests?
Oh, absolutely. A ton. I mean, in our first episode, I gave a little bit of my background, and I've been drinking coffee since I was a kid, and I have so many good memories that revolve around coffee. And I think the message that we're trying to convey and also pull out of the guests is that the experience is also important, right? It's not just about the coffee bean itself and how it was processed and how it was brewed, but it's also the communal aspect of coffee, because at least for Christian and I, it was a very important part of our upbringing. So it makes sense that we understand that other people feel the same way about coffee. There's a very strong emotional tie to the coffee rather than just the taste itself. So
yeah, it takes on a deeper meaning. How about yourself, Christian? Is it a deeper meaning for you, just having a lot of maybe good memories that go along with those cups of coffee?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we talked about in the first episode for Coffee Break, I had mentioned a very I'd say common occurrence in my early teens or childhood, where my grandfather would come over to our house, and then he would ask me to make his Folgers. So we were a Folgers family back then as well. And then in going through that whole process of making the coffee for him, I would start sitting down and drinking the coffee. So I didn't start quite as early as, say, like childhood. But there is that memory where I would then sit with my grandfather and, have a small sip of this coffee and chat a little bit about what he was doing, or I would talk about what I was doing. And that is definitely a very core memory for me around coffee.
Absolutely. And Jose, you're not 4'5", right? Because you stunted your growth because of early coffee drinking.
No, not at all. And I mean, when I first started drinking coffee as a kid, it was mostly milk.
Yeah, absolutely.
With a little bit of coffee, right?
You know what I used to do? Those little coffee creamers, the little small little packets. I would think I was such a big shot at 7 years old when my grandma would give me that and just enjoy that, and I would just drink these little condensed milks and think that was coffee. So I'm happy you didn't stunt your growth at that early age there.
I mean, I'm not tall, so maybe I could have been a little taller.
That's a lesson for all the kids out there. Don't start at 8 right there for anyone out listening right now. With the podcast that you all have going, what's the direction you're taking it right now? Where's podcast for Coffee Break going? Let's say a year from now. Where are you hoping it's going?
So I think we want to start getting into the more technical aspects, or getting into more specialty coffee type stuff. Up until now, I mean, if you listen to the first series that we had, Beans for Beginners, it was a very beginner focused series. It was taking you from the Folgers person to maybe just grinding your beans at home and using better methods at home, but not really delving into specialty coffee. So essentially, we kind of want to take people through the same journey we went through, right? And start exploring, going from that stage of just buying whole beans and grinding them at home to eventually starting to care about single origin and the process and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one of the directions we want to take it in. And bring some more of that information. But Christian, you can disagree with me if you want.
Well, disagreements between us are kind of rare, so that's not going to happen here. But the direction with taking it more into the specialty space, that is definitely one aspect of it. And as I kind of touched on previously around cultures and rituals in coffee, we'd like to do some more of that as well. I think the specialty element is interesting. But the cultures is also an element of it that we can't forget about. So happy to continue that direction.
Sure. And Christian.
Yeah. And
well, no, go ahead, Jose.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, going back to your previous question, I think that's something that we've been planning, right? Getting guests from around the world that can speak to coffee cultures all around the world, much like Christian's friend did in the Italian coffee episode. So
it's nice getting a different perspective from someone across the other side of the world, and understanding coffee is vastly different everywhere you go. I mean, I have a Mexican background, and coffee is kind of a big thing, right? For me at least. And I mean, it's for a lot of people. I don't want to take that away from anyone else, but for me, it's culturally rooted in some form or another, whether because someone was getting up at 4 a.m. to kind of work, or maybe someone in the family has a farmer here in Mexico that's growing beans themselves. But how much fun, Christian, has it been for you having done this show with Jose over the last a couple of years now? In terms of everything you've done, how much of your friendship has just grown because of this?
I mean, I would say a lot. So before the last 3 years or so, Jose and I spent a decent amount of time together. So aside from working together, when we kind of first started working together, we also lived in the same apartment complex, and that wasn't by plan. It just kind of worked out that there was the location was favorable for what we were doing. So we were seeing each other quite often. And then as life happens, Jose had children, and then I had my own child, and the pandemic happened, and then there was just so much that kind of I would say it kept us apart, but we were still staying connected.
Sure.
But coming back to now that we've done this podcast and we're actually approaching our our first anniversary here. In
okay, first anniversary.
Yes. So it has been great to, sit down with Jose every Sunday morning, or most Sunday mornings is when we talk about podcasts or do recordings, and have a chat, not just about coffee, which we both love, but also catch up on the week. What'd you do outside of the podcast? It's maybe a requirement for dads or parents to kind of schedule time to chat with your friends, because it's really difficult to just have those very spontaneous moments.
I can imagine. Right? Have you both ever heard of Red and Link from Good Mythical Morning by any chance? You know who these guys are?
I don't, unfortunately.
You don't?
No.
I was going to say, these guys, you guys remind me of them because you're the coffee version of them. They've been lifelong friends for most of their life, and they have the same chemistry as I'm hearing with you both. Jose, how much fun has it been with Christian? I know that you both have kids. They're starting to form friendships. They're going to continue the legacy of Coffee Break, I'm sure.
Yes, hopefully so. I'm already starting to see it on my own kids. Apparently, they like to eat coffee beans, which is a strange thing. But anyway, no, it's been a blast. And like Christian mentioned, the pandemic kind of drove us apart a little bit. Not in the sense of like, we weren't friends anymore, but in the sense that we weren't keeping in touch as much just because, we weren't running into each other at work all the time. So this was kind of an intentional way for us to make time and keep up with this friendship. And, we share this mutual interest and love for coffee. So it was a good opportunity for us to keep developing that love together. And as you can tell from some of the episodes, I mean, we have very different tastes. So it's fun that we can agree but disagree at the same time.
I was about to ask you about that, the chemistry wise. I mean, you guys are very, you agree often and you're okay with each other's opinions, but have you ever had a good challenging conversation with each other where you're fully disagreeing in terms of either content or direction?
Christian, I'll let you take it first.
Honestly, I was just sitting here in silence and wondering, have we had something along those lines? And personally, I don't remember one off the top of my head. And hopefully that's not me kind of like burying a memory that I didn't like. Jose, how about you? Happy to hear if you said that there is.
Strong disagreements, not really. We had a disagreement, I guess, slightly on how we were going to approach the espresso machine episode, because we were thinking different entry level points. So that's why we decided to take that approach with that episode. But that was a very amicable disagreement, to be honest with you. And aside from that, we just had some discussions on strategy, the content strategy, and the content for the podcast and the Instagram. But I guess the fact of the matter is we both kind of are looking at the same direction. So as long as we both realize that we're trying to take the podcast to the same place, it's kind of easy to hear each other out. And, when Christian lets me kind of say what I need to say and I let him say what he needs to say, we kind of understand where we're coming from a little bit better.
Would you say, Jose, that it's easy to be able to kind of work with Christian and bounce off and kind of grow from those ideas, because you might have some part of it and he might come back and say, oh, let's do that. And here's the other idea that goes along with it. How much of that is helpful for you?
Yeah, just kind of like complimenting each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Just complimenting each other, getting ideas that bounce off of each other. Is that easy for you?
Yeah, I think so. And, we're very respectful of each other. So I think it just makes our conversations really a little more lively, right? Especially when, like Christian mentioned, we typically meet on Sunday mornings. So when we get a little more awake and we start having a little more lively conversation, it's actually kind of fun because we start kind of getting a little creative and bouncing more creative ideas. So if anything, I think it's a very positive thing.
It totally comes off as that. And I will say that you guys are a lot of fun to listen to and actually hear that smooth talk with each other and chemistry. And you can hear the friendship, and you can definitely hear how hard you all are trying on this podcast and trying to promote it and get it out there and help educate people. Christian, where can people find Coffee Break?
Sure. I will say right now that I'm not typically the person that does this, so hopefully Jose gives me an okay score. So obviously the website you've mentioned before, Eric, is coffeebreakpod.com, and that's a pretty good place to both see the episodes when they come out, and then also see some show notes, etc., and some fun links that we share every so often. And then as far as our Instagram, we're at coffee.break.podcast. That's pretty straightforward, I would say. And I think our podcast is actually listed not just in Apple Podcasts or the Google Podcasts, but Spotify and quite a few other places as well. So you guys can have a pretty good chance of finding us.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure to have you both on the show, and I can't wait to have you back on in the future here.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Thank you. And don't forget to subscribe and get lost in a conversation about everything coffee. Podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcast. Visit Everything Coffee at everythingcoffee.podbean.com. Visit us at everything.coffee.podcast on Instagram. And thank you for joining us and supporting local businesses in your city and around the world.